Thanks for here.
Thanks for that. This is totally terrifying. And I just wanted to thank all the organizers and the staff of Creative Mornings who have helped me set up for the talk this morning over the last few days and weeks. And I just want to thank you all in advance for your generosity and being so gracious for your reception of me. And also, I think it's important to take time to connect with your peers in this amazing Vancouver community of Creative Mornings. So it's great that we're all making community together this morning. So I also wanted to acknowledge that we're on unceded territories, but we've already covered that, so I'll skip that portion of the speech. So for those of you who don't know me, I run an emerging gallery called WAP. That's sort of the short form for, oh, yes, this thing. I run a gallery called WAP, which is short form for Wil Aballe Art Projects. It's located in this building in Strathcona at Hastings and Heatley. And the thing that I would say is that for all of that you've read in the newspapers about contemporary art and all of its bubbles and so on, it's not as sexy or glamorous a profession as one might think. And I unfortunately don't spend my days lounging around like Amy Adams in this movie by Tom Ford, in Tom Ford. I will instead speak directly to my experience running a young gallery in East Vancouver. So as a Canadian gallerist, my work is cut out for me, I believe. A recent Hyperallergic article confirmed that more than half of Canadians can't name a single Canadian artist. Oh good, it's not cut off. Which is shocking and is definitely a problem. So we create exhibitions at WAP on a monthly basis to try to remedy this problem to some degree here in Vancouver. And the gallery is a model of experimentation and collaboration. And in making these shows, we have to require ourselves to be lured by curiosity, surprise, and wonder. In addition to the traditional painting, sculpture, photo, and video works that we show, we have also held talks. We have done performances, so this is Leaf Hall performing in the gallery's first location in the apartment. And we've done Dance as Art. This is Justine Chambers performing with Evan Sebens last year. We've had site-specific installations such as Matthew Shields' Throne of Sand that was built with 1,000 pounds of sand directly in the gallery. We've had dance parties, we've had writing workshops that reinforce our dedication to presenting a dynamic selection of the what we feel are the most compelling contemporary art practices in the city. We have commissioned essays and poetry to accompany our exhibitions, have made prints and editions to allow for affordable art, and we have fixed up decrepit and under-functioning spaces for pop-up exhibitions. So a lot of it's like figuring art out, reconfiguring it, opening to possibilities, straying, going out of bounds, beyond the beaten path. You know, like when you kind of do this type of thing, you hope that it will be significant, but no one really knows, because contemporary art, unfortunately, to be able to stay in people's memories and in the public consciousness in general, it has to be timely because it's contemporary, but it also has to be timeless for it to last. And unfortunately, as a gallerist, I'm not really a good fortune teller, so I can't determine whether it's going to go beyond in that way. Beyond is a word that speaks to an infinite, expanding greatness, a profoundly big, confusing thing that we are supposed to work towards to achieve. Most of the time at the gallery, I'm focused more at the task at hand in the present. I can usually only think of beyond as the thing that's next week. But Chris Burden, who is an LA artist who made this amazing installation outside of LACMA, once said, "The first time you do something only happens once," and WAP's origin story is quite unusual. I wasn't even meant to be in the arts. I actually took engineering at the University of Waterloo, but I was 18 at the time, so please don't hold it against me. My background is composed of narratives that overlap, run parallel to, and often contradict one another. So to fund my gallery, also and usually, I still work my engineering day job where I'm supposed to be at the moment. And I believe that my engineering background has informed my artistic practice. I got into running a gallery via collecting. So this is one of the works that I own by Matthew Brown. It's something that I love to do and has taught me the joy one experiences when living with art. When you live with art, there's a funny subliminal thing that happens. It's not just looking at it. It's what happens when you don't look at it because it's always in your space. And when it's in your space, you're always sort of aware of it. And every so often, it actually grabs your attention and gives you information that allows you to keep processing what it means, what it is that the artist intended, and how it's made, and so on. So in a super satisfying way, at some point, the whole thing sort of like clicks and unlocks. And I sort of think of my art collection as markers of my learning of contemporary art. Living with art made me quite obsessed with it, and I researched it, looked at it as much as I could, attended all the openings that I could possibly attend to in town, and I even visited galleries that I looked through their back rooms to look at works in their inventory. So I started buying from these galleries and started developing relationships with dealers, which opened up doors for me because I felt that allowed me access to incredible works of art that many, many years later are still these most cherished possessions that I own that embody experience, which I think is kind of a remarkable thing. So out of the blue, what happened next was that I was asked to program a series of talks for a group called Contemporary Art Society of Vancouver, which allowed me to work with artists in close proximity. And that eventually evolved to me curating my first show, which is this show with Nicholas Sassoon in Yaletown, where we actually back projected onto these 23-foot windows on Richard Street so you could see it from the street, and it became sort of a guerrilla piece of public art. I did 3 shows in 2 months in the summer of 2012, and there were all these rumors that I was starting a gallery. And eventually, after a couple months, I did open up WAP, initially in my apartment, for the simple reason that there was no overhead, but it also had very high ceilings, and it had great walls, like that were straight, and that had great sight lines. So I put all the stuff that I needed in storage that wasn't necessary for the gallery, and accidentally became a minimalist. Minimalish, and I don't really miss any of it. So I installed lights in the ceiling, which was the one thing that I did so that it didn't look like a domestic space, and so that the paintings on the walls look like these very covetable bags on the front windows of Gucci. You know, like how they just glimmer. So, so that's how the gallery started. But art isn't easy, and being a person who essentially runs a small business in a city as expensive as Vancouver, where the market for art isn't very well developed, the gallery's existence can be as precarious as the lives of the artists who live and work in the city with its concentration of foreign wealth. And this thought can be paralyzing. The truth is that it's difficult to make a living in visual arts. That phrase, do what you love, isn't so much a prescription for happiness as it is a prescription as to how to get up in the morning. Because if I didn't love running WAP, I simply couldn't get out of bed. And then I couldn't do what I need to do every day as an entrepreneur, which is show up. Running a gallery can seem like a Herculean effort. Rodin once said that people must have the patience of water that eats away rock drop after drop. So when I started in the apartment, I would wake up, I would have breakfast, open up my laptop, and answer emails while still in my underwear. I thought they were like easy little drops, you know? And the virtual presence of the gallery always maintained a veneer of legitimacy. So to many of the clients I dealt with exclusively online, for all they knew, I was running a 15-person operation in a pristine white cube space, like the way you would envision a gallery to be. The gallery had a bit of and I had a bit of an attitude of fake it till you make it in the beginning, and honestly, it helped things move along, and most of the time I didn't feel exhausted. I was mostly exhilarated. That fake it till you make it attitude got the gallery far, so within 8 months, WAP was named by a major art publication, Blue Ann Art Info, as one of the top emerging commercial galleries in Canada. And then within 9 months, amazingly to me, Modern Painters, which is a publication in New York, featured our Scott Massey October show as one of their top 50 picks for the fall season. And in the following month, I was moderated in a talk by Canadian Art Magazine at Art Toronto as one of the next generation of Canadian art. Like, honestly, it was all a little premature, but certainly I was showing up every day and putting the effort in. So I worked when I was even mildly sick, depressed, jet lag, and I was present. So at this point, in the interest of time, I actually cut this bit out, but in short, I had this anecdote about how I was in Art Toronto and I was starting to get sick. And you do these art fairs and you pay thousands of dollars. So you show up and you stand in your booth, it's 9 hours on your feet, and you're talking to people. And I had one client I was waiting for, and he finally showed up. He bought from me the previous year, so he was a big deal client. And we were talking, and I had this cough, so I was like, and I didn't have any water. And on this particular time, I couldn't stop coughing, and it was like so dry and parched, and I was like, and all of a sudden I felt like bile come up, and I actually puked in front of the client. It was so terrible. It was like the worst day, but like, you know, like sometimes it is like absolutely like the worst experience. I hope that never happens to any of you. But this is what it takes to run a gallery. So that story didn't get cut out after all. Because I was coming at the gallery from the perspective of a collector, which is a unique perspective, I understood the rules of engagement with clients, and I thought that if it didn't involve the interaction with the client, didn't affect it negatively, and it didn't affect what it is that the artists wanted to do in the space, then it was negotiable. Like the gallery didn't need to do it. The gallery is this new organic thing, and that we could reassess it. So, I mean, the truth is, the gallery model is out of date. It needs rethinking and innovating. And the gallery model actually hasn't changed since the time of the Impressionists, when the gallery model was invented by this guy, Paul Durand-Ruel, who was representing Impressionists when they weren't widely recognized or even liked. So at the time, if you asked the French cognoscente the following question, who in 100 years do you think will be the most significant painter in the late 19th century, they would answer with one of two people. The first person is William Adolphe Bouguereau, and the second person is Jean-Louis Ernest Meissonier, who made an amazing painting of Napoleon and his troops. Nowadays, we know that this consensus was way off mark because these classical portraiture classicists were academics, were far less important than their Impressionist and Post-Impressionist peers. And even back then, the gallery model wasn't infallible. There were dark days when Durand-Ruel went broke. But Durand-Ruel was an extraordinary businessman and entrepreneur. He was an innovator. He was the first person to give his artists solo shows, and he was the first person to represent artists. And time actually proved that his business practice was really clever. So for instance, it was obvious that at the time, Europe didn't like the Impressionists very much. So in 1886, Durand-Ruel packed up 300 works in 43 crates and took them by boat to America, where he put on an exhibition and met with collectors. And he sold 49 pictures for $40,000, which is a hell of a lot of money for art back then. And many of the works that were sold are now centerpieces in Impressionist collections in American museums. So if we, as creative entrepreneurs and professionals, are to learn from Durand-Ruel, we can learn a lot from our struggles and we can get better, but we must keep innovating. So there's something in the gallery model that to me feels outdated now, and it's something that seems unsustainable. So galleries around the world are wisening up to the financial reality of running very large spaces and attending international art fairs, which, from my perspective, should be called art unfairs because they're so ridiculously expensive that they could sink a gallery despite their promise of blockbuster sales. So far, WAP has attempted a bit of a nomadic model of operating. So we've had 3 locations in 5 years. The first one was in my apartment, one on Francis Street in an old garage type space. Now we're in an East Hastings basement. And we've hosted regular pop-up shows that happen at one-time use sites. And there's been deliberate decisions about what kind of art unfairs we do beyond Vancouver. I also think that there's an opportunity to collaborate with other galleries to find new ways of existing, something that we have done with our upstairs gallery, Fazakas Gallery. I think I have to skip. So this is one of our pop-up shows. Fazakas Gallery. So beyond this, I don't have any easy answers. So part of like what I hope to accomplish this morning by talking to the Creative Mornings community is by putting it forward to a larger forum, perhaps there could be some beyond-the-box thinking that could come out of the discussion. Running WAP in a city that has a very small market for art, we have to embrace our constraints and figure out a way where we can function well within them. So bear in mind, Vancouver is a frontier city. With its cultural endeavors, small businesses, and educational institutions, the region has always embraced a pioneering spirit. We have an established reputation for things like really great food and wine, for instance, but we also have other locally produced brands that are significant outside of Lululemon. It's vital for creative Vancouver people to figure out how they can live and stay here and work creatively. So on the art side, Vancouver has a strong history of forward-thinking community of visual arts people. And the photoconceptualists are a good example of this. So people like Jeff Wall and Stan Douglas, Ian Wallace, and Rodney Graham are some of the most successful artists internationally, and they've achieved their legendary successes staying at home, right here in Vancouver. And every Canadian should know these artists' work. They're really remarkable, they're like groundbreaking people in terms of the history of photography. If you go to New York or London, and if any of these artists have a major new show with new work, it's very, very big news. So Ian Wallace and I once had a conversation, and I asked him, what did you guys do in the early years when you guys didn't have much going on? And what he said was that they created the conditions. So they created spaces for themselves and their peers to exhibit their work, wrote about each other's exhibitions when there was no critical response to the work in existence, built networks to get the work out to a larger and larger yet group of people that became more and more international. And he advised me to do the same. Another photoconceptualist mentor that I had, Robert Klein, gave me this advice. Oops. First you survive, then you thrive. So Canadian Art profiled the gallery earlier this year in an article about Vancouver's real estate problems, because the gallery is currently located in, as I mentioned, an East Hastings basement, which can only be accessed by walking right through the native gallery that exists upstairs, right through that gallery, through their back door, down the steps to the garden level where the gallery's front door is, like this. It's very strange. Such is the plight of all young creative endeavors, though. We have to do a lot and almost nothing. And to be fair, the gallery works beautifully as a space for art. And it's a really great space that's been well received. So at this point, I kind of didn't want to necessarily talk about visual art, so I wanted to bring in this story that I learned from a friend. So a friend of mine is an executive producer in LA who had the most amazing early chapter in his very successful career. In the 90s, he was instrumental in developing and creating some of the most influential music videos of the decade. Okay, I have to skip ahead, sorry. Including Fatboy Slim's Praise You, directed by Spike Jonze, when Spike Jonze was a wee little one and not very well known. And that won them a coveted MTV Video Music Award Moon Man trophy. They were making videos for something like a paltry $40,000, which even in the 90s wasn't very much, which is as budget can be. And everyone was just young and really into making cool work. He told me the story about 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins. Melancholy and Infinite Sadness is the album that 1979 came from. And it was like a 1995 album by the Pumpkins, released as a 2-disc CD with a single, Bullet with Butterfly Wings, which was the leading single, followed up by another single called Tonight Tonight, which blew up. And it made the album one of the biggest of the year, and it crossed over to pop radio stations. So the record company said, okay, we spent two discs worth of money promoting this. Let's try to see if the sales can go into the second year. What's the next single? We need to keep the momentum going. And the Pumpkins said, we should make the last song that we wrote for the album the next single, 1979. So the record company said, great, all right, we're going to throw a lot of money at it. $1.5 million. Let's get some bids in. So my friend got to bid for this job, and his director had this concept that they really liked. So they went with this particular music video concept. And they shot it, and everyone was happy, and they thought it was going to be a great video. So the next day, the film had to be driven over to the post-production facility, and the production assistant, the PA, was driving it over, and he put the reels on top of the car, and he drove off. You guys know what happened. So he lost the footage because he drove off without putting the reels inside the car. And they spent the whole day looking for the footage, and it was gone. They found, I think, the empty canisters, but there was no film inside. Somebody had walked off with it. So my executive producer friend called the record company and said, hey, so this thing happened, and we were wondering if you could give us more money. And the record company was like, well, let's think about it. And they were like, no, we gave you $1.5 million and you owe us a video. And so they had an emergency meeting. And in their esteemed group of people, of directors, this amazing, formidable group of people, they said, why can we secure $40,000 to make to reshoot the video? So there was another concept that was put forward by, I think it was Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Ferris, who ended up doing Little Miss Sunshine years later. And they pitched that option to the record company. They're like, okay, well, we need the Pumpkins on this day, and the Pumpkins showed up, and they reshot it. And the video that exists now is actually the second take. And when it was released, it was very acclaimed, and like history's shown that it's possibly like the most successful Pumpkins video and the best realization of their vision, and it won all sorts of Moonmans. So the reason why I bring up this story, even though it has nothing to do with art, is that I think about it sometimes when I'm having bad days at the gallery. If I'm having a bad day, at least it's not the PA's day. And, and I also think that a lot of days at the gallery, we face setbacks, and we're forced to work around constraints. So for instance, how can we do a fair in New York City as we did this year when the cost of creating and shipping a work can cost tens of thousands of dollars? Well, there's actually a few ways to think through it. So first off, we can conceive a booth with art that can be shipped in suitcases, which is what we did. Or we could exhibit paintings that are unstretched, rolled up, put in a tube, and stretched in New York. Or we could ship works flat that are unframed, get it framed in New York, or we could commission someone locally from New York to make work specifically for the booth. And there's actually probably maybe a couple more options that's on the table that would make for a really strong booth. And I find that the process of going through this type of thinking is really, really fun and intriguing and like super interesting, and it's very energizing. So as another analogy, in fact, limitations can be a stimulant for creativity. So if I was to ask you to draw a tulip with 5 lines versus 500, you'd have to be more inventive with your 5 lines than you would with the 500. And what you may realize is that not only can you draw a tulip very well with 5 lines, you might not need anything beyond the 5 lines. So that's kind of remarkable. The other thing I should say, because the term beyond always makes you think of like forward motion, is that sometimes it's also just good to hit pause and languish and maybe take steps back. So the instinct when you're running a business like mine is you want to grow, you want to get bigger and bigger, but bigger and bigger means faster and faster. And sometimes the thing to do is to slow it down and keep it small, and there's nothing wrong with that. So at WAP, especially at the beginning, I did everything from architecting the gallery space and working with a contractor, designing the website, the logo, the customer service, doing the finance and the sales, working with the artist, installing the work, packing the work, shipping the work, buying the wine for the opening, schlepping the cheese, in addition to curating and strategy and programming. I had some help with some of these things, but most of these things I did myself, and most of these things I had no prior experience with. So I feel personally blessed by that, and I don't think that it would necessarily be feasible for me to have such deep involvement. But the hard work, along with a little bit of serendipity and good timing, which is so important, some fake it till you make it, and the generosity of the people in the community coming to the openings, looking at the art, giving me their feedback, and supporting the gallery where they can. All of this accumulated effort has produced the raw and vibrant art community that the gallery has been able to help foster. So I think that's sort of like the thing that I'm most proud of, like that we're sort of embedded in this community and that we have kind of carved a niche for ourselves, and we've created some sort of condition. It's part of the human condition to feel compelled to move beyond, even when it isn't clear where beyond really is. Forward motion involves agency, intending something and realizing that intention. So because Arts Club's putting on Angels in America, I actually went and reread Angels in America. In part 2, Tony Kushner writes, "We can't just stop, we're not rocks. Progress, migration, motion is modernity. It's animate, it's what living things do. We desire." So I want to loop it back to that statement I made early on in the talk, which is more than half Canadians can't name a single Canadian artist. So instead of lamenting this fact, let's look at it as an opportunity. Here's the thinking process that we've used at the gallery. My friend Alfred in the front row is actually the one who taught me this. Let's pop it. So POP, purpose, outcome, process. So I am like a neophyte when it comes to this methodology, but some of you may be quite knowledgeable about this. So P, purpose. Why do we have to address this issue of half of Canadians not being able to name a single Canadian artist? I feel we have to address this issue because having a strong art scene in Vancouver is non-negotiable, and having a strong art scene in Canada is non-negotiable, and we have to make it happen. So that's one purpose I could think of. Anybody else have anything to say about that? No? Okay, so O, outcome. What would we like to see, and how do we know that we've achieved this? So I could only think of intangibles that are not measurable. I think when you normally go through outcomes, it's very measurable, like, 3 million extra people do this and that sort of thing. But in intangible speak, the outcome could be social networks that we have that are continuously growing, new innovations in our creative endeavors that we can access, and improved quality of life in our communities, which I think we all desire. And then the second P, process. How do we address this? So, well, it takes a village, as Hillary Clinton said, to create the condition of a strong art scene. We can work together to build Vancouver into a creative hub. And to actually, it is already a creative hub in the visual arts sense to a large degree, but we could make it even better. But there needs to be thinkers, gallerists, curators, institutions, collectors, philanthropists, writers, philosophers, critics, marketers, graphics designers, urban planners, architects, art historians, poets, musicians, exciting artists, and cultural innovators to create a synergy with the city's industries and entrepreneurs to showcase the excellence, edge, and energy of the local arts community, and to celebrate the city's emerging importance as a global center for contemporary art. So I would welcome your thoughts and feedback on this. Oh man, I had so many extra slides. My email and website are up on the screen, and thank you so much for your gracious time and attention. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation and connecting to some people in the community. I would love to hear from you. Who has a question for Wil? This hand has gone up like a jackrabbit. All right, Tony, what's your question? Terry, sorry, what's your question?
The guy you puked in front of, did you sell him anything?
I sold him something that the previous year, but not that year. But he did stay around. So I went like this, and then it started to like come through my fingers. So I ran to the washroom and like I cleaned myself up as quickly as I could. I was like, breath freshener and whatever, and then I went back out there and he was still waiting. Remarkable. Yeah.
Truly going beyond. Yeah.
Thanks, Wil. In some of the preliminary material, you made a reference to your interest in musicals. And I wonder if you could just fill that out a little bit, where that fits into this cosmos.
It doesn't really fit in anywhere except that I think at the time when they were asking me some questions for the talk, I was in New York doing that art fair, and we had just seen Sunday in the Park with George, and so it's totally front of mind. And I did think about like coming out here and just singing the whole talk through, like famous musical numbers, but I thought some people might walk out. So.
We have a very welcoming tribe here, Wil. We would have stayed for you, at least until the chorus. Yeah. Who's got another question? I'm going to do one at the back, and then I'll come up to the front here.
When can you give up engineering?
That's a good question. I honestly, I think it's a capitalization thing. So like, if the gallery is on its legs, then possibly that might be the time to consider that I should reduce my 2 careers to just 1 career. But you know, like it's really difficult because I thought for the longest time when in the early years of the gallery that it was like something that I shouldn't talk about too much, like that it was something I should hide. Because I thought it affected the way people perceive the art or something, that it was a less serious thing or that I was just doing it as a hobby. And frankly, like, people might say that I'm doing it as a hobby and it doesn't really matter to me, but it matters to me that the artists who entrust me with their work that they spent 2 years making, that their work be taken as seriously as possible and be considered in the most critical forum. So I didn't want it to negatively affect that for them. But then I had conversations with some very senior dealers, and they're just like, "You're really lucky because like you have this day job, and it patches up like all these weird dips in cash flow, right?" As small business
So
owners
engineering's
know.
your hobby.
Yeah, in a way, yeah, engineering's my hobby. So, yeah.
Excellent. One at the front we had. Oh my gosh, I'm going all the way over to the end.
To build upon what you just mentioned about having to make sales to, make the rent because it is a business.
Yep.
How did you develop your commerce strategy to actually, keep the lights on? Because obviously that's a bit of a stress having all of your extra cash go to that resource.
Well, it's been 5 years, and I've somehow gotten accustomed to having all of my extra cash go into the gallery. But yeah, like there's certain things that I learned. So, like for instance, marketing is not the same as sales, right? Like that's a really important thing to realize. And also, selling is not the same as closing. So these are kind of like hard things to learn. And I have to say, like I didn't really work at Holt Renfrew or like sell luxury before like going to sell art, which is essentially a luxury item. So the way I've kind of gone about it is that I feel like the early years of the gallery, it's functioned more like the way a nonprofit would work, like almost like an educational outreach. So we're teaching people about the art and getting them to understand what the artist's practices are about. It's all very educational. As time has gone on, it's felt a lot more strongly to me that what I'm actually, one of my primary reasons of being is that I have to develop a market for my artists, and that building a market for the artist also means that the gallery is sustainable, and that's a really important aspect. So I'm trying to like actually continuously work on that. And those two realizations that I said, marketing is not the same as selling, and selling is not the same as closing, is really important because I was doing the wrong things, and I wasn't doing enough of certain things that I should be doing. So you learn these things.
Great. We have time for one excellent, very quick, the best question ever. And the hand is still high and strong. All right, Inti, no pressure.
So this question kind of came from my group, and it was just a thought of self-care. And you're pushing so hard that you're getting sick in front of possible sales. How do you balance self-care with creativity and development or growth?
Yeah, I think that's why I put that paragraph about like hitting pause is really, really important at some point, because it was very, you could push yourself too hard. Okay, so I'm a natural like workaholic, I guess. So like that's my mode of operating. So like people are just like, how do you do it? And I'm like, what? What do you mean? Like this is just like the way you do it, right? You have to do it this way. But I do also have a limit, and I kind of am aware of what that limit is, and I sometimes just be like, I'm not taking any calls today, and I tell everybody I know, and I still get calls, but like maybe 2 instead of like 40, or like 2 emails, which is manageable. It's not too bad. But yeah, the 7 days a week thing is a little bit difficult sometimes, and sometimes you just have to tell yourself like, I'm going to sleep in today, or like, I'm not going out tonight, or like, I'm going to go for that extra long drive, or like, this is a long weekend for me, and those things are really important. So.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.